Welcome, everyone. You're here with Shannon and Paula with Sage Wellness Connection, and we're here with another webcast for you. Today, we're talking about the dimensions of wellness for families, and this is such an important topic for both of us. And we also have a special guest with us, Anna Mclean. But before we move on to meeting Anna and hearing a bit about her story, let's just take a brief look at our agenda for today.
Yeah, we just wanted to outline just where we're headed today and kind of why we're here. Of course, we're going to talk a little bit about our own philosophy and how it relates to the family and family's wellness as a collective. But then I think it's important to almost take it back a little bit, talk about family wellness, but how does that make a difference with your individual wellness, or how does it all work together? Because those are important things to consider as we march forward and we become parents, or we are parents, or we have kids moving out and moving on with their own lives. All of those things interact with our own personal wellness, but also that dynamic of the family wellness. So it's important to talk about all of that. And then, of course, we always end with who can help. Who are the people out there that if we're struggling with a question in whatever developmental phase we're in, who can we look to that might be able to give us some answers? So we'll definitely dive in a little bit more with that. And I think that's why we felt it was important to have a special guest here, because those are one of those people that could help out families and has been doing it for a little while now. So first, we'll just talk a little bit about ourselves, though, and where we started. I'll let you start, Paula.
Sure. So for myself, of course, I have children if you've listened into any of our podcasts or webcasts before. And so of course the topic of families is very important. When my children were young, I was fortunate enough to be able to stay home with them, and I ran a family day home. So really looking at all aspects of development for not only my own children but the other children that I cared for. So that was really important to me. And then when I went into the workforce, I actually started my career in uh, family support program. So working with young families who were parenting children 6 and under. And so that was always exciting. My educational background is in recreation and community services. And then, like Shannon, you'll hear some of the same stuff from her. I went on to do a degree in the human services, and as well some of the wellness stuff was became very important to me, and so the psychological health and safety certificate was very important. And just because I love to learn, I am a yoga instructor as well, and just really enjoy sharing my passions and knowledge to be able to support other people and help them along in this journey.
Oh, and I'm sure many of you have heard us talk about how we've kind of had these parallel journeys for so long, and yet we didn't start together, but looks like we kind of did, because we both started in that recreational field. Both began the majority of our careers supporting families and supporting children, and moved on a little bit in supporting families with children that had some form of a diagnosis or some form of what we would call a clinical diagnosis around mental health. So that's really led us to this path, and it just seems a natural way for us to add on to our education and adding that psychological health and safety and the yoga and the executive life coaching. It just accumulated all of those things that basically we've been doing for years in supporting families, coaching the children to be able to have a life that was of value, that brought purpose and meaning to them. And so all of those aspects that we've done in our own personal lives and used even within our own families, we're able to share now with other families and their kiddos. And I can't even just call them kiddos anymore. Lots of those kiddos that I started with are families now raising their own kids. So that's also very exciting that they're able to carry on with that as well.
And it's just interesting to be able to actually see those cycles through from, when you
Mhm.
meet a child and they're young, and then seeing them grow up and then go into adulthood and begin to look towards their own families. And so that's been really rewarding for both of us. So let's move on and welcome Anna. Thanks so much for joining us today. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Course. I am Anna Mclean. I started my career in human services in the summer of 2013. So it's been just about 9 years. We're coming up on 9 years. I started right out of high school with just a passion for working with children. And so through that, I had worked with children with developmental disabilities in some capacity or another, and then moved into my secondary education in child and youth care, and then from there had gone on to social work. So I have a diploma in social work and a diploma in child and youth care. I am currently actively working towards my RSW designation. We're getting there. And so I now work in a family coaching and mentorship position. And so I work directly with parents. I don't work with children anymore, but I service the children through their families because we know that families are the biggest impact on their children. And so we support the family from a whole family dynamic to support the wellness of everybody within that family unit.
And I think you bring up such a great point there, that if we're not going to support the families, then it's very hard to have that impact with the kiddos as they become teenagers and become their own adults. And then, like you said, Paula, those cycles continue. So if we can step back and support those families like you're doing, Anna, that has such great and profound impact for the kiddos and how they progress and move forward.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm interested to dive a little deeper into this conversation. It sounds like an interesting one, but first off, we'd like to always show our appreciation for the Canadian Mental Health Association and the Rural Mental Health Project.
Mm-hmm. We'd like to just do a quick overview around those principles of the Rural Mental Health Project, because that's what's led us here today, is bringing special guests such as Anna onto podcasts or webcasts so that people can learn from those, but these supports are local. And I think that's what becomes so important when we're talking about a rural mental health project. We're not saying that mental health looks somehow different when you live in an urban center to how you live in that rural setting. Sometimes there's those generalizations that, of course, that we can make. But on the other hand, there's some things that are completely different. And that's why people choose to live in a rural setting over the urban center or vice versa. So for us with this project, is a community-driven project. So we wanted to make sure we were highlighting the people within that community. And that's what we mean about those strength-based approach, that we have so many awesome people within this community that can support people with their mental health and well-being, but they may not be exactly the person you need, but they might be that beginning person that could send you off into the next direction. And I'm sure when we dive a little bit deeper in our conversation with Anna, you'll see that that's kind of almost the primary role of what she does do, is collectively bring some people together, look for supports for the family that can help them along their journey to make them into those confident, competent families that are also producing kids that can feel the same way. And in saying that, that becomes that whole community view, because we need everybody within that community to have as much understanding, confidence to be able to support people. So the more people that we can get to kind of remove bias and judgments of what does mental health mean, then we are able to help more families just by being maybe neighbors, not always being colleagues or not always being the professional in that part of the scenario. But of course, it does take a collaborative approach. We know that. We have worked on the impact committee or been a part of the impact committee for many years, and it's changed names a few times. But it's because the essence of the project has been around mental health. So we've just tried to move along with as we develop within the community to what the needs are within the community. So that is kind of that backbone person to our project that has helped us as we have done these webcasts and podcasts. And often that's where we get all these wonderful people that come and participate in our webcasts and podcasts. And finally, and foremost, I guess we'll say, is we want people to understand that it's 5 in 5 people that have mental health. That means there's nobody out there that doesn't have mental health. And I think we put these parameters around the words mental health, that means something like a diagnosis or an illness, but it really doesn't. No different than if you're going to go out for a jog or going to ride your bike because you're working on your physical health, you also have to work on that mental health piece. So it's so important to understand all of us have mental health that we must work on just as much as we want to work on all of those other pieces. And Paula, I'll let you kind of take it away a little bit about when we talk about all of those other pieces, we talk about the 8 domains of wellness, and I'll let you, Paula, just explain that a little bit more.
Sure. And I actually, Anna, it's interesting when you were talking, because I was thinking you are embodying those 8 domains by doing the holistic work that you're doing with families. You're not just looking at one piece of the puzzle. And that's exactly what we talk about when we're talking about wellness, that we can't work with just one aspect of wellness and think that that's going to solve all the problems and that's going to take care of all the issues, because the our approach is a holistic approach and it encompasses all areas of our lives, because each dimension of wellness is interconnected and it's also interdependent. So if one area is out of sync, it can create an imbalance, which of course impacts the entire system. But if there is an imbalance, we can use another area that we have a strength in to help lift up and boost up that other area. And I imagine, Anna, that in a lot of your work, that's what you're doing. If you see that the family has a strength, then I'm sure you work with them to cultivate that, to empower them to be able to improve their circumstances.
Well, absolutely. And part of that too is just the strengths that parents have within in and of themselves. So if they're struggling in one certain area, we can empower them by showing them everything they're already doing, which is an important part of our well-being in the first place. Because if we have that faith in ourselves and if we have that motivation to keep going based on what we're already doing, it really impacts everything. And I think that falls into the 8 dimensions quite well too.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm hoping that I see that there's some glitches in our internet, so hopefully we can all stay here for the next little while. Um, Anyways, so we do use the wellness wheel as a tool. And so it's a great, because a circle, a wheel is such a great visual. I think we all know what that looks like. And it's just a really easy way to take a look at the pieces that go into our wellness. And so we look at emotional, physical, intellectual, social, spiritual, environmental, occupational, and financial. And we're going to touch on each one of these today just to give you an idea how they're all interconnected and interdependent in our lives.
And we really thought this was a great way to end our series that we have been doing around the 8 dimensions of wellness,
Mm.
because the family kind of embodies all of that. It's kind of where we begin, where we continue, how we stay connected. So it's all of those kind of things. And then finding people such as Anna to help support, maybe highlight those strengths, and then help with maybe gaps of places where they're feeling less confident, and finding someone that can help support them to move them on and feel, as we always talk about, pump up that wheel a little bit. If you're super strong and you have a great spiritual connection, our spiritual family that's there to support you, sometimes we just need to be reminded that we can lean on those people, just like in our social connections as well, that maybe when we're struggling a little bit, we just need a little bit of a break, that we could call upon some people that could maybe step in for us. So, a person such as Anna can help people find those different strengths, find those different things that they can call upon when some of those other areas maybe aren't as inflated as well as they could be.
Absolutely. So let's take a look at some of the families in our community.
I really thought it was important to say, who are we talking about? We talk about families. There's families in Wainwright. And this is really just looking to Wainwright itself, just give you a little bit of a glimpse to when we're talking about numbers. We do have quite a few families. We're not a big place, but we're not talking about the MD. So we are servicing even a broader amount of people than just these numbers. But we need to look at the dynamics of that, because that can change what family wellness is, the difference between 2 parents and 1 parent, and the expectation and roles and finances and all of those things can play when we change those numbers just a little bit. From a single parent with 3 or more children, is going to look a lot different financially than the 2 parents with 1 child, of course. And it's not to make any form of judgment around that. It's just purely to say, okay, I'm sure, Anna, when a family comes in, it's important to find out, okay, do you have support in your parenting role? Is there somebody else that is equal to you within the home that's making decisions for the family, supporting in a financial sense, supporting in an emotional sense? Or if they don't have that, and then how do we boost that up? Same as that tire analogy as well.
And just even looking at the dynamics of a family overall. Do you start with that when you're in your practice, Anna?
Yeah, so we use something called the protective factor survey. And one of the first questions in the protective factor is determining how many adults are in the home, not necessarily just like another parent, but adults in general that can help with that parenting capacity. And then we also look at finances. And so we know that financially, when parents are stable, it's a whole lot easier to feel stable in your parenting too. And so those are the two most important things that we look at. And then that support piece goes a long way. Doesn't matter if you have one child or 6 children, having a support person there to support you in your parenting journey is huge. And then we also look at the aspects of, okay, who is your family outside of the homes? Like, are there grandparents involved? Are there aunts and uncles involved? Are there cousins involved? Because if you're only in that, if you have that single parent family, or even for the 2-parent families, that you don't have a whole lot of support out of that, what does that look like next for you? And how can we make that family feel empowered and comfortable in their parenting? So absolutely, this is one of the first things we take a look at.
Well, and it's so important that we really embrace the idea that we are not in this alone, that we can access support, and that's okay. That it doesn't mean that then we can't do it just because we're getting support. It's the old adage of it takes a village to raise a child, because of course it does. You want to be able to expose children to grandparents and uncles and aunts and supportive neighbors and supportive community members. I think that's wonderful.
Absolutely. Our value as parents is not determined by whether or not we're parenting alone. So, and it's important to make sure that when we need help, it's okay to ask for help. And I know that's a whole lot easier said than done. I myself have experienced that, but it's just that constant reminder of it's okay. Nobody's going to judge you for reaching out for help.
Oh, for sure.
Absolutely.
And I think when we look at some of these percentages, that's the intent of looking at this. It's to say, if there's 70% of mental health, I always hate using the word problems, but as something that research likes to use right now, that it is an onset during childhood or adolescence. Well, all 3 of us have worked in that early intervention field for quite some time as well, to say how important those supports are early, because this is when things are beginning to be identified. And think of the difference, whether you're helping the parents and the families learning how to parent, but also supporting them, that if a child has, if there's some kind of clinical issue there or challenge, if we can support them with that as well and give them good information and support, the success rate is just so much higher, because we already have enough challenges as it is. And just right down to when we're looking at the young people between 15 and 24 that are experiencing, mental illnesses or challenges, and around that substance use piece of it as well, we have to acknowledge that. And we have to look at these kind of things so that we're making good decisions, even when we're parenting. How do we parent through that? Because it can be very challenging based on our own histories as well. And of course, Anna, you did bring up about the income. That does make a difference on supports just based on benefits alone. We know that in supporting families that have benefits that may include things like counseling and those additional level supports, they're very expensive. We have to acknowledge that. So we need to find ways. And I know there's lots of great places that will do sliding scales to really help families get involved with some level of counseling. Of course, there's mental health. They do it for free in a counseling capacity, but sometimes those challenges are even going in extension to that. So we have to find ways that we're supporting our kiddos and our families to be able to know what to do in those circumstances. And of course, when we're looking at 50% of those mental illnesses beginning in childhood before 14, means we need to get in there sooner than later, because that's the key to this. And we know this doing early intervention, no different than the difference of having access for kids to be able to not necessarily read for themselves, but have somebody reading, the difference that can make for them in their ability down the road. And that's just a little simple piece, not necessarily about their mental health and well-being, but the difference of just having that early intervention piece is so important.
Well, and I think that it's important then, if a child is at risk for developing a mental illness, that there's a healthy adult involved who can notice that and knows how to support the family unit to figure out next steps, and then also to support the direct parent with the circumstance as well, because that's pretty heavy. It's all pretty heavy, right? If you have a child with a substance use disorder, or a child with a mental illness, or even just mental health challenges, it's a lot to deal with, and we need to be able to highlight the supports that are available for families in these situations.
Absolutely.
And so that takes us right into our next slide, is promoting wellness in families. This is something that's probably at the forefront of your practice, Anna, I'm assuming.
Yep. Yeah, it absolutely is. One of the main reasons families come to me in the first place, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, for sure. And we talk about things like opportunities to socialize, problem solving skills. These are all great things that we take on in life that we need to have. It's, as they like to use the term adulting, we can't do that very well if we don't have problem solving skills. But if we don't have an ability to connect with people, to be able to ask for help, that's just, the very essence of a very big barrier. So we've got to be able to support people to have those basic level skills to know when to reach out and how to reach out.
Mm-hmm. In this slide alone, I think this really speaks to many of the 8 dimensions, because we're talking about your, opportunities to develop your social wellness. The problem solving has a lot to do with your intellectual wellness, or maybe accessing resources to help you along with your financial wellness helps then build on and build a stronger family, I guess is what I'm trying to say. We're talking about physical wellness. What an important piece. And we know you probably do a lot of this work. It's not just moving your body. It can be, but it's not just moving your body for a lot of kids and parents to really understand and build a strong foundation when it comes to nutrition and sleep, as well as movement. But sometimes movement in kids that have some challenges can look different than it would in others. If a child has sensory issues, or if a child needs like some of that heavy work in their movement, or needs body breaks, all of that, right? It's for you, I imagine that it's looking at all those pieces to be able to support the families and get their needs met, as well as the child's.
Mm-hmm. Well, and on the topic of movement in general, it's just figuring out what works most for the family and the children. If your kiddo is not a type of kiddo that loves to be outside, but they really enjoy helping you carry laundry baskets upstairs with laundry, absolutely go for it. It's still a form of movement, and you're still doing what you need to support your children in that. Or if you have a kiddo who really enjoys being outside constantly and you're having a hard time, it's okay to bring outside in. Grab a bucket of snow, sit in the kitchen floor. It's totally fine to make that happen. And we work with families. I work with families to figure out what works best for them and their children's needs, while still supporting the parent, because we know we can't be outside 6-7 hours a day.
No.
Because our kid wants to. So how are we going to manage that for the family? And we work around it until we figure out what works.
Well, and it's also, we live in Alberta, where the climate does not always let children be outside. It becomes dangerous. They can't be outside that long. So on a day where it's -40 and the wind is blowing, then what opportunities can parents provide for the kids to move around and meet those needs, but inside?
Yeah. And then just general wellness. when we think about role modeling for children, we know that we role model behavior for kids, and we know that we role model what we do and don't want them to do. We also need to role model the things like the problem solving skills and the things like the actual physical wellness. Are you making sure that you're eating with your children? Are you drinking a glass of water while they're watching? Are you getting the right amount of sleep? Are you brushing your teeth with them? Just small, simple things so that they can see, hey, mom and dad do this too, or grandma and grandpa do this too, or whoever it is that's an important person for that child. It's promoting your own wellness in the process of role modeling to your child. And how can we incorporate those into our daily lives to really show parents that you're doing it? Keep doing what you're doing. You've got this.
And it's okay to talk out loud with kids and just say, maybe you need 5 minutes because you are trying to reflect on a problem that you're having and trying to solve it. It's okay to say, mom needs a couple of minutes. I'm working through something, like whatever it is. I just need to figure this out, and I need some quiet time, and I need some space to be able to do that, because that teaches kids that that's okay to do that, to take time. We don't always have to solve things, in the snap of the fingers or I'm trying to think of a good analogy. So I think letting kids know, or parents taking time away to go to a fitness class if that's what they need, go for a walk, go for whatever it is that they need, if we're looking at different areas of wellness, and telling kids why. I think they need to know that, so then they grow up and they remember, oh, that's right, mom used to go to her aquafit class on Wednesday evening because her friend was meeting her there, and they like to do that. And then they're adults, and then they're seeking out those same opportunities because it was role modeled to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And it teaches them,
Sorry, Anna, I was just going to say, it normalizes all of those things. It's not saying you as a child, you have to brush your teeth, but I don't. No, it's just, that's what we do as a family. And I think the more things you can say, this is what we do as a family, they're more likely to carry it on, like you were saying as well, Paula, that, hey, yeah, right. On Wednesdays, mom goes out or dad goes out, and one goes one direction, one goes the other. Those are all normalized things, that there's no animosity around it. It's just a piece of what we do. Everybody has some autonomy, but everybody also has family time.
That's basically what I was just going to say. Yeah.
Same wavelength.
I was just going to add to it, also takes away the stigma of, so for Paula's example of going to the swim class on a Wednesday night, it takes away the stigma of, I have to do this to be healthy. And it adds in that I'm going to socialize, I'm doing this for my mental health, and takes away the aspect of there's only one reason and you just have to do it. It adds a whole other area of things that they can do for themselves, and it doesn't have to be set into one domain.
Sure. You're right.
And I think too, we're not saying that you as a parent, you love to swim and you're going to go do laps, so therefore your children must as well. And I think that's something all of us as parents have had to challenge. Maybe it's something that we love, and of course we want to pass it down, and have that, something that we have passed to our kids and now they're doing. No, that's where we learn the flexibility, that we've just shown them this is a passion of yours or something that you really love to do. Now let's explore for our children, what are things they like to do that have the equivalent value to them, whether it's, for our social well-being, our emotional well-being, or our physical well-being, but we're just opening up that door. And then it also reminds us we do have to be flexible, and that's okay, because we're going to now model that flexibility for them.
Yes, exactly. And so I think this leads us right into our next slide, because all these things we're talking about really connect to our emotional wellness and relates to our feelings, and allows us to be able to cope better with life stressors and challenges. Because no matter, we just talked about this morning, Shannon, no matter how positive you are, no matter how much you work on routines and being consistent, life happens, and we need to learn to be able to manage our emotional wellness because of that.
Oh, for sure. Well, just based on that conversation, we don't know what might happen along our journey. For sure. We can't control all the details or the outcomes, all of those kind of things. And there's grief that comes across with life. There's disappointment that comes with life. So we have to build a skill set to be able to acknowledge it, give her time and space to be able to say how that felt for us, but then how to move on from it in a good, positive way, that that was a part of our journey, but that's not the whole journey either.
Exactly.
So when we look at an emotionally well person, I think, when I think of all the kiddos that I've supported in families, one thing is really beginning to accept kind of who we are in that and feeling good about that. Anna, you kind of mentioned that when we're building some confidence and competence in even in that parenting role, we can't do that if we're not going to be able to accept who we are in that, how that looks for us, and then model how we can treat others in that too.
And like a really important thing that I talk to my parents all the time about, we don't have to compare ourselves to others, to other parents to be an effective parent. And it's okay to parent as who you are. And that's just part of that accepting who you are and taking upon yourself and being okay with who you are as a person and taking the skills that you have and using them in the way that you can. Everybody's different, and that's needed. It's okay, and it's absolutely necessary as a society. So use your skills that you have, and it's okay to not be like your neighbor.
And be okay with where you're at the time of your life. Because I know for myself, I was a different parent when I parented my first child. I was very young. And then 7 years later, when I parented my last child, I was a different parent. And I just had to accept that. My life circumstances were different. I had more support with my last child. And I was 7 years older. That's huge. So I think we have to just sometimes be a little bit more gentle and accepting of where we're at and who we are and just what we have available to us as well, because parents are we're very hard on ourselves.
I think with societal norms at times too, it's kind of,
Yes.
hard on us as well, and hard not to internalize that too. Because I think you bring up a great point. You were at a different place in your journey, different life experiences, allows us to be able to parent differently if we're going to acknowledge and accept those life experiences, allows us to look at that. But regardless, you're 7 years later.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure what I did even from this day to 7 years ago, at least I certainly hope that I'm doing that just a little bit better. So it's okay as a family to say that as well in your parenting. Of course, you're going to do that a little bit different from your first child, maybe to your second child. If you had 4 kids, I'm sure that that would look differently again. I think even in my own family, as far as being the third child in that, we always joke how different that looked.
Mhm.
Well, of course, because mom with her first child to by the time she was really parenting me, she was parenting me as a single parent as well. So
Mhm.
that even circumstances changed everything for her in that moment and had to parent differently. So was I given probably more autonomy to do things, at a way younger age? Yeah, I can even acknowledge that. But that's okay because that's just a part of the journey.
Yes, for sure. And one thing, maybe Anna, you can shed a little bit of light on this, but sometimes I'm thankful that there wasn't a lot of social media platforms when I was parenting, and there wasn't. Pinterest is wonderful. I love Pinterest, but if I had saw everything that was out there that everyone was doing, the perfection of a lot of it, I think that would have been really hard for me because you can't compete with all of what's out there.
And so most of my families do not actually use social media. If they do, the extent of their social media use looks like connecting with friends or family. But most of them have commented on just that they have a really hard time seeing their best friend being able to buy all these things for their kid, or their neighbor having a supportive partner, or their friend's mom being a part of their life when she hasn't spoken to her mom for actual years. And on a personal level too, I don't really use social media a whole lot either, but I know that based on what my families have told me, I I get why parents don't use it, and I get why it's also a really big draw. I totally understand why some people are drawn to it and why some parents try with that, not necessarily competing, but just try to keep up with other people. And then their mental health may struggle a little bit because they're seeing their friends going through all these things that they wish they had. And so, on that note, though, if you need to step back from social media, absolutely do it. Nobody is forcing you to
Yeah.
post your children on social media. Nobody's forcing you to keep an account. There are other ways to connect. If you need to prioritize those other ways, go for it.
Well, and I think it goes back to that self-acceptance and what is making things okay for yourself, because I would have never been the parent that was organized enough to have the nice little signs like grade 2 and the child's holding it. Sometimes I think my kids, it was like going out the door, wait, I need a picture, snapping it as they're like looking at me, we're leaving. Like that kind of stuff, I think was, I had to just accept that that's me. I'm not going to be able to have the perfect kind of outer appearance because that's just too much stress for me. And so I think that I'm glad that you have those conversations with families and that people are making choices to do what's best for them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and
Yeah.
I think too, if we just look at the three pictures across the screen, we
Mhm.
need to remember that's what they are, just a little snapshot in a moment of time. So yes, of course, the younger child is sitting there perfectly, looking like they're meditating, because that looks perfect. And then if we begin to judge ourselves based on those pictures, it's pretty easy to be pretty harsh with ourselves. Why can't my kids sit down, or why can't we have the perfect journaling picture, or whatever the case might be? They're just snapshots of time.
Mhm.
Not to
Yeah,
say
because before or after that picture with that young girl, we don't know what was happening.
exactly. Yes.
Or even realistically, I have a few pictures of my 2-year-old and he looks like he's smiling, but I can tell you right now, he's having a full-on meltdown and I just happened to catch the right moment. We don't know what's even going on in that moment. We can't
True.
compare ourselves to others
Yes.
when we don't have any more than just a small visual of a second in time.
Yeah. And I think the overarching point here is to really say that, whether it's a snapshot in a picture or whatever the case might be, that we can't judge ourselves harshly. There's been years worth of people worrying about what their neighbor thinks of to what they're doing, or why does their neighbor have nice fancy vehicles and they don't. I'm all the power to you. Wherever what your family values and beliefs are is what you need to follow, and vice versa, as opposed to making a judgment call, or putting that equating it to worth or the value of your family. It's just important to sit back with your family and decide what your values and beliefs are and where you want to land while you're raising your kids, and whether that be two parents, mixed parents, if you want generational parenting, we see lots of that where we've got grandparents or great aunts and uncles involved, whatever works. Because at the end of the day, we're just looking for ways to support each one of those domains. And especially when we talk about our emotional wellness, that comes from connection with people too, and modeling from all those generational levels. So there's so many things to think of when we speak of emotional wellness.
Before we move on to our next domain, I just want to take a moment because the pictures are one thing in this slide, but I think just talking briefly about what's underneath them. So having a plan as a family for handling stress, and it doesn't have to be a solid plan that you're going to, go from, okay, we're going to look at this first point and we're having a bit of stress, so we're going to work through these next 8 points. It's just a general idea. So maybe this is even a plan about, for mom and dad, if we're feeling really stressed, how are we going to manage it so we can still parent well? Do we need to, like for myself, do I need to call my sister and say, I'm really struggling? I just need 5 minutes for you to listen to me so I can just unload? Or is it that we're going to go for a walk as a family and step outside of the house and just kind of regroup, take a breath, take a moment? So a generalized plan on what we do when we're handling stress connect with supports. So access someone like Anna, for example, because Anna's probably going to be able to help with creating some plans around, okay, what do we do in troubling times?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I am a Triple B practitioner. Triple B has some wonderful, wonderful templates for you to kind of figure out a plan. So if you're a visual person, you can plan that out for, and it doesn't have to be a specific trigger. It can be just something happens. These are the steps that I'm going to take if I need these extra supports. Same with stress lessons. I have training in stress lessons for grades 7 to 12, where it's specifically that, figuring out what the triggers are and then how do you cope with those stressors. And that's a whole family approach too. We can work through what are you going to do and what does that look like for your family. And sure, this might be something that works today, but maybe tomorrow I need something a little bit different, and that's okay too. And then, and with that being said, back to the modeling piece, it just gives a really good picture to kids of I can't plan for everything, but I can plan for how I'm going to handle it. I can plan for what my coping tools are going to be in that moment. I can plan for who I'm going to call. And it just gives a piece of control to the parents, but also the kids to know that I can do this.
Well, we had a plan on what was going to happen if there was a fire.
Mhm.
You know, it wasn't, we talked about it as a family in a calm way, not to stress the kids out, but it was so much, it was relieving for them to know that there was a plan if there was a fire, what we were going to do. So why can't we have plans for other areas of our lives? I think
Mhm.
it's just something that gives a little bit of peace of mind.
Yeah.
And I like that with Triple P. It's not intended just for parents that are struggling right now or have kiddos that have diagnosis. It's meant for parenting, regardless, because who
Mhm.
gave you lessons about parenting other than what you experienced as a child are the only training that we actually get. So what I love about the Triple P is it is that overarching plan for the family. Paula, gave a good example earlier about, hey, we're both feeling a little stressed right now. Let's take 5 minutes, a break from this conversation. You go this direction, I'll go this direction, before things escalate to where it's very hard to repair. That's a part of that plan, is just putting it in a more concrete style, like whether you are the family that likes to put it up on the wall and say, hey, when we are feeling really stressed, we're all going to take 5 minutes, or we're going to go for a walk, or we're going to whatever it's going to do. Or we like to use kind words, so when we find ourselves not using those, maybe that's the time that we take that break so that we don't say something we don't mean. It's just creating that plan for the family.
Yeah. Or just, and maybe part of that plan is a proactive approach to taking some time each day for yourself.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So moving on to social wellness. Wellness helps you perform social roles effectively and comfortably to be able to create a strong support network, just like we've been talking about. And development in this area of your life not only allows you to form healthy relationships with peers, but also secure relationships with romantic partners.
Well, in essence, you said we have been kind of leading to this very slide about
Yeah.
creating connections, positive connections, because we need them, whether it's in times that we're being challenged with or we're frustrated, like you suggested, maybe you would use your sister to give her a call and just say, I just need to talk about this. I don't really need answers. I just need to say it out loud and release it. That is part of that social connection piece, to have cultivated those across time, that you have those people. It doesn't necessarily have to be a sister. Maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a colleague. It doesn't really matter who, but it does matter that we not only model this for our kiddos as they grow up, but it's such an important skill to have as an adult, to go into that working environment, just to go into life itself. Because then when we know that we have people behind us, we can feel more confident that when times are tough, we've got somebody to go to.
And if you have friends or family that you're close to, maybe setting some of those parameters and boundaries, letting them know that they're part of this plan and maybe you're part of their plan, that when you call, you could even have like, this is one of those times, maybe you have a code word or something, that this is one of those whatever times, crazy times, whatever you want to use. And I just need to talk for 5 minutes. And then that person knows what their expectation is, that maybe you're not expecting them to say anything. They can just be present for you. And then you're there for them if needed as well.
I think that's such a great plan in itself, because when we're in the heat of the moment of something and then we call someone, somebody may feel like they need to solve that problem for you. And
Yeah.
then all of a sudden we're frustrated with them because they're saying, well, what about this or what about that? And it's like, really? Seriously? I didn't want an answer. I just wanted to be able to say what I needed to. So it's really great if we can create those parameters and boundaries and with our friends and family. It's okay. That's not a negative when we say, we're going to create some boundaries around that. It's just respecting that person of what they can handle as well and what role they can play for you. And once we have defined that for them, it's less stressful being that person. If you know, hey, all I have to do is sit there and say, oh, yeah, that sounds frustrating. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. We'll talk to you next week. Okay, bye. Then you're not feeling like, oh my goodness, what do I have to say? I'm not really sure of all the details. What if I say this? What if I say that? We just relieve them of that, and they actually simplify the duty for them.
And even for yourself too, if you don't feel like talking, it's totally okay to sit across the couch from somebody and drink a cup of tea and just ignore each other for 20 minutes. That's still co-regulation in certain senses.
It's so true.
Yeah,
That's
that's
such
The
a
an
good
amount of
idea.
times that I've gone to my brother's and just sat on his couch while he stared at me. Yeah. And that's okay. It's that aspect of co-regulation.
That's such a great point, Anna, that not everything has to come through conversation. And I think that, we promote that even through Triple P with our kids, that, sometimes they don't need us to give them the great lecture or tell them how awesome they are. You've got this, you'll be okay. We kind of want to do that as parents as well. Sometimes they just need to go for a drive so they don't have to think about it. And
Shannon,
as easy as that. Sorry.
Shannon, I was just going to say, how many times have you and I been on the phone with our families and just been on the phone?
Been on
We're
the
doing
phone.
our thing, they're doing their thing, but it's just needing a little bit of that closeness and knowing that you're not alone.
Mhm.
So, yeah, great point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
goes back to youth and mental health counseling too. If they need to sit in that room for an hour to be with a safe adult, it's okay if your kids are just doing that. You don't have to force them to walk into the counselor's office and talk. Let them co-regulate to the point that they need to, and they're going to open up when they build that safe relationship. How they build relationships might look a little different than we do.
Well, my
Oh.
parents used to go for coffee, and when I was a kid, I always wondered, because like, why it just seemed like such a brief time. Like they just went out and came back, but I think it really was to get out of the situation. They were coffee drinkers, so they had a coffee, and I know that sometimes they just were present with each other and not saying a lot, because I talked with my mom about it as I got older, like what that was for them. And it really was that, just being together, almost like getting away, taking a breath, and just spending some time in each other's presence.
Really not putting too high expectation on it.
Yeah.
Okay, this is our moment. Here's our 5 minutes. We better get it all out. That's high expectation. What a great way to just have a few moments. And if it's just sitting quiet, a bit like we were saying earlier, just having a coffee, just being with that person, that's impactful in itself.
Yeah. Or going for drives. Like
Yes.
the whole Sunday drive kind of idea. I think people brought that back a little bit during COVID because there wasn't a lot to do. And, I've done that, where my husband and I just go and drive, and we don't have to have a lot of conversation, but it's just being together in a space where we can listen to music, look at scenery, whatever. And then you come back feeling refreshed.
Well, we joke about that in my family because my mom, in her position, would go on country cruises with
That's
the
right.
people. Yes. And then we would also go on country cruises, and it would be like, oh, here we go, country cruise. But you know what? When I now, as the adult in that, I do appreciate those times that were spent, regardless of the jokes maybe we would make around that. It was just being time spent. And that becomes so precious to you down the road.
And I think that captures what we're saying in this slide here. That's a great way to keep up with friends and family and to stay connected without the pressure, and keeping up the social ties as well. By, I think we have to be a little bit intentional when we are keeping up ties, or when we're keeping ties with friends and family members. You do have to, make an effort to maybe make a call once in a while, or do a FaceTime, send a text, things like that. We do have to be intentional, so then we have people there when we need them, and that they know that we're there if they need us.
Oh, for sure. And I think probably the last 2 years really taught people not to
Yeah.
take that for granted anymore, that you have to be a bit more, like you say, Paula, intentional about maybe it's your brother, your sister, or your more distant family member isn't necessarily the one that makes the calls. Don't make that the thing that stops you. If you're the person that likes to make the call, just make the call. It doesn't matter who it
Yes.
is, or keeping that tab of I've called 3 times. If they don't call me back 3 times, then we are not on anymore kind of
And
thing.
sorry, go ahead,
No,
Paula.
go ahead, Anna.
Oh, I was gonna say, just get creative too with how you're making that connection. I had a mom tell me not too long ago that she was tired of Zoom and phone calls because that's all she's been doing the last 2 years. So she started mailing people pictures.
Oh, that's awesome.
What a creative way to connect with family members and not doing the thing that's emotionally exhausting you.
Yes, so true. We can be creative in that. And I think this is what hits us, when we talk about this closer to Christmas, that feels like a lot of pressure, that it's got to be something, a very specific social connection or social occasion. It's the same thing. Be creative, be what works for you and your family. Don't put pressure on one day, because your relationship doesn't happen just in one day. It's across a lifetime. So cultivate that in a way that works for each one of those personalities, and remove some of the pressure from it.
Yeah. Well, I know, Shannon, I think you've heard this story. My husband is very good at keeping in touch with people. He's great at it, whether it's a text once in a while or a phone call. And he has a friend that he was really good friends with when he was about 3 years old. And the friend moved away from Wainwright when he was 4. And they are still very good friends. They're actually going on a trip together right away. And it's because they've made an effort to do that. It doesn't just happen by accident. And I think it is important that, you have to make that decision to reach out and be connected.
And being slightly flexible. I think of the friends that I have in Ontario. No, for lots of them, that's not their thing to, like, once a week, we're going to find out what's happening or not. But I know that when I go back there, it feels like I haven't left, that
Mhm.
we haven't missed that time. And I think initially when I came out here, a few of them used to write letters and I would write back, but it was a lot of pressure to make it happen. Then life gets in the way. But it's just to understand that every relationship can look different, and however they cultivate that, but as long as you cultivate it and keep it there, it still is probably available for you.
So our next dimension of wellness is spiritual wellness, which allows you to develop a set of values and beliefs that help you seek meaning and purpose. Spirituality can be represented in ways, for example, through self-care rituals, yoga, or religion. And being spiritually well means knowing which resources to use to cope with issues that arise each day, which is exactly what we're talking about. And so interesting how it could be another domain, because they are all interconnected. We were just talking about social wellness, but I think I can see the connection here with spiritual wellness also.
And lots of times, collectively doing something which you would think, oh, that's going to fall under the social wellness piece, brings that spiritual piece
Hmm.
to you, and for lots of people. And that can look different. And I think we've had a few great conversations about spiritual wellness that you can, once again, and we keep using that word, cultivate, but it really is something of a practice that works for you and your family, and really setting those values and beliefs for your family, and then allowing them to develop as they move on in their own life. I think that's the key part of that, they will always look to the history of what they experienced in their childhood. But when we can build somebody that feels confident to move along in a practice for themselves as well, I think we really have done our job.
I know for myself, when the word spiritual well-being was a bit daunting to me when my kids were young, because I didn't have that foundation of maybe the Sunday church. That wasn't what my family did. And so for me, I thought that, I guess I equated spirituality to religious practice. And so I felt that maybe I wasn't able to impart that on my kids. Maybe I wasn't able to teach them about their spiritual well-being because I didn't have that foundation. And I think since we've been having a lot of these conversations, Shannon, I hope we're really shedding a light on what spiritual well-being is. It's whatever it is for you that just really empowers you to be um, who you are, develop that sense of peace and meaning. It's different for all of us.
And I think when we had a great conversation with Jody Williams about this, about using that, as we'll go on to eventually, that intellectual well-being or wellness of using that curiosity
Mhm.
to seek something out. If you don't know whether it is a more religious practice, go find out about it. Maybe it is something that works for you. Maybe it is something more along the line of yoga. Maybe it is something totally different and in between. That's okay. Use that curiosity to explore. That will help you find meaning that actually means something to you and your family.
Yes.
And just for myself too, because I did grow up in the home where we went to church every single Sunday. And for a long time for myself, spiritual well-being meant that. But as an adult, that's not who I am. And it's a constant reminder of spiritual well-being. That definition for yourself can change and grow and evolve as you change and grow and evolve. And it's not going to stick to one thing forever.
Yes, definitely. It's not static. This is I think a huge potential for growth is in the area of spiritual well-being, like it is in many areas. But yeah, it's a dynamic practice, no matter like where you're at, what age you're at, the people you've met, the things that you're doing, and the places that you go. I think that it all impacts our spiritual well-being.
And once again, as we often talk about, it's removing the judgment and bias, whether
Yes.
that's just even judgment and bias on ourselves. I know that I had grandparents that were very religious, like followed many religious practices. There was, in my mind, felt like a lot of judgment that came around that. So I didn't understand that maybe that to me was what religion was about, was more about judgment. And it doesn't necessarily need to be. So it's just, if you're going to look into it, don't cut yourself off in any avenue. Just really explore and take the time to do that, because these type of practices that we talk about, whether it's meditating or praying or joining groups, that's something to explore and find out what works and supports that piece. So it isn't just one little special piece over here that maybe this is all we knew as a child too. It can be many things, and the outlet can come in a variety of ways.
And Jody talked this morning about a big impact on her spiritual wellness is her journaling, because
Mhm.
that's the time where she really gets to be herself, connect with herself. And so that might seem unconventional, but if you are taking that time like she is to just be open and honest and reflective, then of course it's spiritual wellness.
And I think we did talk a little bit about that, standing beside people that have different
Mm.
values or beliefs, how important that is, that just because somebody's doing something different, more often than not, the judgment is coming from the judgment on ourselves. To, once again, if the neighbors are going to church every week or going to, having a certain spiritual practice, and you're not doing that, is that judgment actually coming from the neighbors, or is it coming from yourself? So, just looking into that, really diving in to make sure that you're not putting that judgment on yourself, but also understanding, if we can't stand side by side with people that have different values and different beliefs, that's really the challenge. That let's be a little bit more open-minded. Doesn't mean we need to change who we are, but we could stand side by side with our neighbors.
Anna, do you talk at all with parents about core values or family values?
Family values, yes, very, very large. Probably one of the first things that I do when I speak with families, actually, because all of our work are going to revolve around what their families and core values, what their families' values and core values are. I can't support families if I'm basing my support off of my own values.
Exactly. That's
So,
your own agenda.
yeah.
Yes. Yes. And I know Triple P does challenge people to really look into that. If that's not something that they've considered before, it's something to dive into a little bit to really determine what are those values, core values for your family? What are those beliefs that you're kind of setting the whole premise of your parenting and your family itself on?
And take a look at our webcast that we did, that Shannon and I did on spiritual wellness. We do talk a bit about looking at values and how to determine your own core values. And then I think you can take that and expand it into family values as well.
And we work a lot too, because my program prioritizes families who have children 13 to 18. That's what we prioritize. I certainly do not only work in that aspect, but if we have a family that has that age range, they will be given priority. At that age, children are really starting to develop really strong values that might stray from what their parents are and what their families have. And so we talk a lot about encouraging children to develop their own values and what that looks like, and how are we going to support them if that differs from the family values.
Yeah,
Um,
that's great.
yeah.
That's exactly what Shannon was saying, right? How do you stand beside someone that has different values and beliefs?
Yeah, and it's hard. It's definitely hard for parents who have that 13, 14, even 16, 17-year-old that has drastically different values, because some of them sure do. But the more open you are about it, the easier that parent-child relationship is going to continue to be. So.
That's great. That's
And
a really
I
good
think my
thing.
mom always used to say, as long as it wasn't illegal or harmful to somebody else, she was okay, as long as she knew what we were kind of the direction we were headed. But those are the basic parameters around it to keep it simple.
Mhm. So we're moving on to physical wellness. And of course, we've talked a little bit about physical wellness already, maintaining a healthy body, being active, eating well, nourishing your body, and your sleep habits are a huge part of this as well. And then paying attention to the signs of stress on your body, learning what works to minimize this. And of course, this is what we always like to stress, seeking medical and mental health care when you need it.
Well, and I think what's funny when we talk about babies, the first thing you hear most parents, oh, it's because they didn't sleep enough. Oh, they didn't really eat. So that's our first thought when they're babies. Then when they get older, it's like they should still behave. I don't care. Maybe they didn't eat, but they need to behave and they need to do this. And yet the impact follows us through our entire lifetime. I'm sure if we all step back and really evaluated, why did we act that way? Why were we kind of grumpy? I know how I can be if I've not had enough sleep in the morning. I know I'm grumpier. Let's just get real here. So I know the impact, and then I know how maybe a conversation that's a tougher conversation, and I haven't had enough sleep, and maybe I didn't even eat my breakfast yet this morning. I know it's not going as well, but I know that if I said that as an adult, there'd probably be some judgment like, get over it. But yet it has a very large impact on our life, and we can't underestimate that sleep, that proper nutrition, and then of course, like we were talking about earlier, that getting out and being physically active somehow, using our body to make sure, if we're just going to talk about circulation alone or mobility, that we maintain those kind of things for our life.
Yeah, and I think the time change is when people really do start to
Yeah.
realize the impact that sleep and routines have on our lives as well. I heard a lot of people saying that oh, this time change has really messed me up. And it does. It's true. It's a real thing.
Mhm. And I think, Anna, you talked about earlier, just in the simple things of families brushing their teeth together. Did you sit down and have that meal together? those make a difference. Did you have a bedtime as an adult, or did you just make it seem to your kids you just go to bed whenever and you don't need sleep? Those impact kids and they see things differently, and yet we know it impacts everybody.
And in that routine, speaking of the time change, that routine of showing those things of this is what we do helps with the changes that come just from day-to-day life. You still have that predictability of a routine, so you still have that, it still cues your body, which in and of itself is just physical wellness.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is. And routines, I think for myself, having a routine allows me to be able to like it's a coping mechanism just in itself, because it, like you were just saying, that it kind of signals your body to know what's coming, especially for bedtime or whatever it is. But yeah, it allows us to um, feel secure as well.
Well, even in that emotional regulation piece, I think we've
Mhm.
talked a little bit about this before in other webcasts about if you're not being prepared for the day and you already maybe have, struggle a little bit with your anxiety. I know for myself that my day is always better if I'm prepared somehow. If I know what I'm going to wear, if I've got my tea basically ready to go, if I even write down to have the dog food ready that I just need to set it out for the dog, I am not as stressed. But if I have to rush through all of those things because none of that's taken care of, that changes my whole day for me. And that's me as the adult. So I've always seen value in that. I think I identified that very early as a kid that I needed to do the same thing. So it's really looking to your family as well. Will that reduce some of the stress in the morning? If you're that family is getting up and it's chaotic and everybody's running around, they can't possibly be as nice to each other because everybody's just trying to manage and get through. But if you create this bit of routine, it doesn't have to be 100% structure, but at least have a basic level of a routine, then that people can calm down, they can think a little bit more. It helps with all of those things. If you know what time you're going to bed at, you know about how much sleep you're going to get, there's actually less stress in those kind of things.
And then I think that brings us to nutrition and food, and nourishing our bodies is a huge part of our physical wellness as well. And families are busy. We know that. And it can be stressful to, especially when kids are in different activities, parents work, homework, all of it. It can be tough at meal times, but it is really important to be able to create that um, healthy foundation for your body and also for the future for kids and adults. As we get older, we need to nourish our bodies just as well. And so that can be a part of family time together, is planning meals, grocery shopping. That could be a great way to look at your financial wellness as a family. Let's take a look when we go to the store and look at the prices. And well, we're going to take a pick. You can have this one because it of the cost, it's just works better for us, rather than this one that's a higher cost. And so having those conversations about why, and then cooking together is a great way to connect. And food, again, can be a huge part of our social wellness also. So I
Oh,
think those are all great things.
for sure. When we all we hear right now in the news are stories about food security, how much it's
Yes.
going to cost. That is very stressful in itself, no matter what position you're at in life. But if you still have kiddos that you need to feed, sometimes or some are pickier than others, that having a plan, but also giving some choice in that plan where they feel a little bit in control, then it can be easier as you move forward with the family than just putting things like the old school way of putting it on the table and that's what you're eating. Often doesn't promote a healthy relationship with food down the road. And I think that's a key part too. And I know it's just something because we did do a lot with my son. We were very busy. He was actively involved. He became an athlete so we were gone. He was training lots. But I didn't want us just always eating fast food. One, I didn't even like it myself. And it just becomes a bad habit without getting the nutrition that you need on the other end, let alone the cost, becomes extraordinary. Anyone raising a teen who is between 13 and 17 that is growing knows what I mean. When you're drinking 4 liters of milk a day and you don't know how they can possibly do that, that's going to cost you some money. So we always cook together. We pre-made meals. We froze them so that he loves meat. He could have his meat, he could have his potatoes, he could have his vegetables, and it was going to be something that was going to fill him because he did eat a lot. And the results of that is that's something he does today. He still has his Sundays where he cooks all his food for the week. And then he knows he's going to eat better than if he just comes home because he gets home late. Then you're less likely to have something really good. And not to mention the cost. If you're going to use your food in an efficient way, is way better than we know the possibility of throwing out food here and that cost.
Oh, yes, exactly. And I think Erica talked a bit about when we did the wellness in the winter months. She talked about sometimes she doesn't have time to do the full meal prep, but she'll pick a couple different meats and just cook those on the weekend. Like if she's doing some kind of roast and chicken or whatever it is. And then she has the groceries to be able to make the sides during the week. But yet the bulk of her meal is cooked in, and that's another good strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Anna, do you talk a lot about meal prep and nutrition and that with families?
I don't talk a ton about nutrition beyond like I do promote take away the power of the food. This is not healthy and unhealthy. Everything just has different nutritional values. Beyond that, I don't talk much about what you should and shouldn't be putting in your body beyond the Canada Food Guide. That is definitely a dietitian, and I do recommend my families go to dietitians. Meal prep, I will absolutely help and support with. I have a lot of families actually where we go through a whole lot of meal prep ideas and how to get there and what that looks like. And it just makes lives for families a whole lot easier, especially when you have 6, 7 kids. A lot of my families have quite a few children, and so when you have that many children and trying to feed them all and trying to plan that in an evening is a whole lot harder than prepping it beforehand. And so in terms of like the actual discussions, not so much necessarily as the nutritional aspects, but certainly the meal preps.
Well, and I know that you've talked a lot about taking the pressure off around food and taking that pressure off parents around that. I think that was just a conversation we had about your own son. He's not making it such a huge issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that I'm a firm believer in. As a child, we were very, very pressured to eat all of our food off of our plate. And I remember eating things I absolutely hated just to be able to leave the table. And I don't want that for my kiddo. And I have still sometimes not the best relationship with food. And so I'm trying to change that for my own kid, and it's working beautifully. He eats a whole lot more than I do sometimes, like in terms of variety. And I can see that in him. And we're at the point now, he's 2, and we're at the point now where I can put a cookie on his plate with supper and he'll eat his salad first because it's just the same. Everything is just the same for him. It's just nutritionally different. It's just we're making that relationship and we're building and we're growing with him. And as he goes, he's learning what his body needs.
Mm-hmm. And teaching kids, it changes. Absolutely. The child that I was, and I was pretty particular, I will absolutely admit that, has changed. I eat food differently now because I was eventually exposed to it. And that never worked for me as well, that you have to eat this or you can have nothing else. Well, for me, then it was like, I guess I'm having nothing. That's okay. I can go for days. Don't you worry about me. So I think that, understanding the kids that you're dealing with, showing them that there is a different way, there's not, obviously there are treats to some degree, depending on our relationship with food, and understanding we can't necessarily eat that all the time, but not making it such an ordeal that, where we're becoming rebellious and thinking, fine, I'm going to hide that and I'm still going to eat it, because it does, that relationship with food becomes everything when we're an adult.
And really promoting whole foods. And I know I've heard people say it is expensive, but re-looking at what a whole food is too, dried beans are super inexpensive. And there's lots of meals, lots of healthy meals that can be made with dried beans and rice and things like that. So just taking a look at whole foods and what that means and accessing support around that in terms of a dietitian or other community supports that are available for that.
And the choices in food too.
Mhm.
If you know that you're going to end up throwing away a carton of blueberries because you can't make it or you can't get through it in a week, buying frozen is fine. It's a whole lot better than buying the fruit leather snacks. And if you want to give your kiddo fruit leather snacks for sometimes, that's fine too. It's just making those choices and knowing what's best for your family in those moments, but actively making the decision to feed your family what you want while still having that balance.
Exactly. And moving on to financial wellness, I think this slide is missing maybe. So when we're talking about financial wellness, we are talking about living within your means, uncovering your finances, taking a look at your finances to be able to feel comfortable and live comfortably.
And I think this once again, I know we've said everything is about, oh, it's so important when you're an adult. But these are the times that I think traditionally we weren't necessarily mentored the same way about finances. So how
Mhm.
do we learn? I think it's so important to teach kids about the different pieces of finances, what savings look like, what things cost. We had a great conversation with Roxanne. She's a financial advisor, and saying people don't have a relationship with actual money the same way.
Mhm.
We've got these plastic cards, and what does that actually mean? When I was younger, we still had money more than anything. So I knew what was in my hand was all I had to spend, not, oh, I could still have access to other money. So it's one, stepping back and making sure our kids understand the value of money and then the different aspects of money. And we talk about the saving, spending, borrowing, because I think, we also are now in a society where borrowing is just a part of life. And no judgment, I'm no different than anyone else about borrowing money, but you need to understand it to truly understand where the value is in that and how do we get there to be able to borrow money for one. And that has to come with the how we spend money and then how we save money. And feeling confident about knowing what debits and credits are. We're not really taught that in school.
No.
And I talk about taking an accounting course in high school was the best course I took because it actually gave me that valuable concrete information of here's how bank accounts work, here's how income tax works, all of those kind of things that seem so elusive and we're so unsure of and so afraid to even ask questions.
Yeah, because it's so important because when people are struggling financially, it causes so much fear, so much stress, and it causes people to feel like they're out of control.
Mhm.
Oh, for sure. When we talk about those top 10 things that family and people struggle with, it is around money. That always comes and, bubbles to the surface. If we're going to have fights about something, it's going to be money. Things cost money. So we have to be able to have a good, healthy relationship with it. Because I think when we talk about our emotional wellness, often that can impact our financial wellness in positive ways and good ways, but we can use things like shopping as a bit of an escape. That it feels kind of good when you buy something for yourself.
Well, don't you actually get some kind of endorphin rush
Yes,
from purchasing things?
you sure do. And I totally can understand it. And I've always joked on pretty much every webcast about my need to fill up my cart virtually. I am the epitome of a window shopper in the new virtual world, because part of it for me is putting it in the cart, but not making the decision right there. Because
Mhm.
if it is, I probably have a whole lot of things that I really don't need.
Yeah,
And
and
I've
then your
spent a
stress
whole lot of money.
level would be really high.
Yes, absolutely. So maybe finding ways that are kind of fun like that. I get to see what's out there, but not feeling the need, like putting some emotional piece around it that I need to do that. And I think we see that whether that's in a social thing. We talked to Christina about social drinking. is it social or is it something we need? Shopping can be the same thing and money can be the same thing. So we just have to make sure it's a healthy relationship, but we learn the essentials about it and teach our children about it.
Sorry, Shannon, I moved on.
No, please.
Too quick. But Roxanne from Clarity Financial, her information is here. She was very encouraging for everyone to actually take a look at your bank account regularly and look at what you can take away if needed, if you're feeling a little bit financially stressed, and then see also where you can save. She suggested maybe actually taking money out of the bank and using it for purchases instead of always using your card. But I think the biggest takeaway that I took from her is just take a look at it. Bite the bullet if you're avoiding it, if it's something that causes you a lot of stress. When you actually know what's going on in your banking and you have an idea of what you want to do for a budget, it really actually alleviates some of the stress in the end.
I think including your kiddos in some of the decision making. You kind of
Yeah.
said that earlier, that here's our options here at the store. We can have 10 of these if we buy this brand, or we can have 5 in this one. If it's so important that you just absolutely love and only can have these, then you're going to buy the 5, but then you understand the difference. And just working your way through that. Here's our family finances. I think often that was hidden from us as a child so that we didn't know. But including them right at the beginning, I'm not saying stress your kids out and say, hey, we don't know how we're going to eat next week. That's not what we're saying.
No.
But certainly include them in the conversations. And when they feel that they're part of the process, they're more willing to say, hey, I've heard it from kids before. Here's my money that I saved. Can I contribute in some way? That's such a great, thing that we want our kids to learn, is to how do you be generous to somebody without, of course, putting everybody at risk. But it's a great tribute to have.
Giving kids allowance as well can be a way to teach them how to manage their own money, helping them save for something, helping them make a plan around how long it'll take if they're saving for something. And we talked about with Carolyn McCauley in our environmental wellness. She talks about collecting bottles, and you and I talk about that as well, Shannon, that allowing kids to take part in collecting bottles, or maybe they can help take bottles back to the depot, and maybe some of that could be part of their money. It just gives them a feeling and a sense of control as well.
Oh, and what a great way. Once again, we talk about that interconnected piece. Not only is it we're doing something good for our environment well around us, you're also being able to actually make money that's outside of that traditional budget. So it's not impacting, we've got to pay for rent, we've got to pay for food over here. When you collect bottles, that doesn't need to be a part of that. So maybe that's the opportunity to learn how to have a bit of a savings, but it doesn't come for free. We have to work a little bit for that. And then it just has a two-pronged approach, that you're also, being kind to your environment around you too.
And then accessing supports in the community, right? Even supports like Anna, maybe when you're talking with parents about stress and wellness and all that, maybe finances come up, and then Anna can direct you to someone else in the community that might actually be able to provide some real hard, tangible support around finances.
Absolutely. And like I said earlier, finances are one of the first things that we talk about. It can be intimidating having a stranger sit across from you and ask you about your finances. I'm not there to judge. I'm just there to see where we can support you and where we can go from there. And there's lots of resources within and around the community that can help with those financial aspects. And some government programs, if you really needing just a bit of extra help for a little while. In terms of teaching your children about money, there is something called Money Mentors, and it has activities from grades 1 to 12. They're really cool activities. A lot of the kids that I support on my caseload love them, and it gives them that sense of this is what money's about. And one of them is making that shopping list and going through, I think it's like a grade 3 or grade 4 activity where you go through and make that shopping list with a set budget that the parents give their children, and figure out what they want to buy and what they're going to do with it. And so it's just teaching those life skills at the same time. And then it gives the parents, a sense of pride while they're watching their children manage their finances and seeing what maybe they weren't able to do when they were little.
Yeah, excellent advice. So segueing on to our environmental wellness, as we were just talking about it, environmental wellness inspires us to live a lifestyle that is respectful of our surroundings and to live in harmony with the earth by taking action to protect it. And environmental wellness promotes interaction with nature. It is the awareness of your personal and global environment.
And as you had mentioned earlier, we talked to Carolyn McCauley, and as a dietitian, we weren't really sure where we were going to head in our environmental conversation, but it was like the perfect conversation to not only talk about, yes, collect bottles, let's clean up our environment, let's take care of the things around us. We did talk a little bit about our personal environment in our homes. And that decluttering piece and how that can impact your emotions, but also on the food security side of things. What are the things that you can do? What kind of vegetables, and when we're going to talk about whole foods, can you produce that are right in your backyard then? So there's all kinds of aspects to environmental wellness where easily every member of a family could participate in at their own development and understand and contribute in some way. It's call upon that intellectual curiosity again, and you can find all kinds of things that can impact that environmental wellness, whether that's for the broader good or even just within your home.
Yeah, this is a topic that I find so interesting because you think it's one thing, but there's so many layers to environmental wellness, and I think for a lot of parents when they have young children in the home, it is really working on that personal space to really because they can control that, and teaching kids what it means to take care of your space is a huge thing as well.
We talk about just creating these safe and supportive, inclusive, sustainable communities. I know that seems like a whole lot of words, but it is just making an environment that everybody can feel good about, feel safe in, be a part of, contribute in some way. Because when we're contributing to our community, we're less likely able to do something negative against it. Having worked with high-risk kids, that was one of our main goals, was get them reconnected with their community, have a sense of pride for that community, because it was way harder to vandalize, do something negative to the people within that community when you were actually connected to it. So it even has a broader impact than just cleaning up the garbage piece of it.
Yeah.
It just really, comes back to that social piece and having connection, how important that becomes when we look at kiddos that, have had more traumatic experiences to begin with.
Yeah, that's a great way to connect it for them. And that's also just as you're talking, there's so many other domains that come into play with that, right? You're really connecting the dots or puzzle pieces or whatever we like to say.
Well, and I think that's like why we came up with some of the things, we talk food security. Well, yes, let's look to see, is there a community garden? Maybe a garden is not something you can have. You don't have the space for it. You could use pots and planters and things like that if you have limited space. But sometimes some places have community gardens that give you a little bit more space of things you can grow that can last you across quite a bit of the winter as well.
Or get together with a friend. Maybe they have a garden plot. Maybe they'll let you plant a little bit, or you can work together. And it would make weeding a little bit more fun if you had someone to chat with while you
Wouldn't
were
it?
doing it. Yeah. Or if you do have too many vegetables because you're overzealous and you plant a bunch, donate some of those vegetables or do an exchange, which we've done at our office in the past, where someone has apples and someone has cucumbers or someone makes salsa and we exchange things. And I think that creates a nice balance as well.
Mhm. And it's really speaking, back again, creating that community, cultivating all of those kind of things, because what you give out can come back as well. And that's a little bit of the whole essence of the environmental wellness. We're giving back in the way of taking care of that environmental well around us, and it's giving back to us by us being able to grow our own vegetables and have beautiful even plants around us, because that for me emotionally makes a difference to be
Mhm.
able to see. And that feeling of, I think a tomato never tastes as good unless you're the one who actually grew it. It just seems like the best tomato ever. I'm sure it's probably not. I'm sure there's better versions out there. But for me, when I have grown it and succeeded in growing that and actually been able to put it on my plate, it just tastes so much better.
Yeah, such a sense of accomplishment when we can grow our own food.
Mhm.
Another area is volunteering at a thrift store or donating. And there's lots of places that we can donate, not just right in our communities, but often the women's shelters or homeless shelters will accept donations of clothing as well.
And I really like where our society is going in that, where, I think it makes people feel better about it when we say it's upcycling,
Mhm.
whatever the case might be, because we have so many things around us. I've said this before. I will buy something, think it's the most perfect special. I'm going to love it. I'm going to love that sweater. I'm going to love those pants, because at the time when I tried them on, they seemed like the best thing ever. And sometimes it just doesn't work out and they don't feel the same or whatever it is. Why wouldn't I want to move that on? Not only does that help my own environment around me to keep it less cluttered and not feel the pressure even of, I bought that, darn, I don't like it as much. Somebody else will like it. So if I can donate that on, that's, to me, that gives me a sense of pride in knowing that at least somebody is going to wear that, love it, maybe as much as I did when I originally bought it. But then we're keeping that environmental piece. We're not just throwing it out, because there's always somebody that will like it.
Yes, absolutely. Moving on to intellectual wellness. So, intellectual wellness, I think, is one of our favorite areas. It involves having an open mind and being curious when you encounter new ideas. And I think being curious is something that we talk about a lot. So, continuing to expand and enhance your knowledge. And it encourages active participation in scholastic, cultural, and community activities, allowing time to explore your creativity.
Well, and I think, Anna, you can speak to this too, because you seem to be a lifelong learner as
Yes.
well. You have, started in one area, which makes sense. You kind of have stayed there, gravitated that direction in supporting children, and then have expanded from there.
Mhm. And not only that, so the next, I will be going back to school at some point or another. I don't know when. So you're not wrong. I am forever a student, and I'm okay with that. I really like the knowledge, and I really like the learning aspects, and it helps us grow who we are as people. What I learned 9 years ago when I started differs from what I do today. And sure, I've taken some of those aspects and I still largely practice how I did then, but there's always new information coming out, and it's okay to take a step back and realize that, hey, this is going to work a little bit better. And just continuously expanding and learning. Reading is very, very big for me. We read a lot in my family, myself and my son, um, just to help us explore what we like and what we don't. And it helps us learn about other cultures and other communities and what that looks like for them. And um, I think that learning is something, it won't ever stop. It's nothing to be, it's just something that you're going to keep doing. So why not take an active participation in what you want to learn?
Well, and I think um, for you being able to share this gift with your son is huge, because I know that I've seen pictures of some of the things that you teach him to do, or I guess you allow him to explore,
Hmm.
really explore.
Yeah, yeah, and that's just it too. Like we were talking about the food piece earlier. In that's him learning about himself
Mhm.
and what he likes. And in that, that's also me learning how to support him through that. And so there are different ways to learn. It doesn't necessarily mean going to university to get another degree. We're always learning in different aspects and different ways about different things. Um, and it says right here too, stay open-minded. It's okay if your beliefs change. If your value changes from one year to the next, that's fine. You're just expanding what you believe in and you're staying open-minded to the world around you.
Well, and learning that there is more than one way to do something, that's
Mhm.
building resiliency. And especially
Yeah,
teaching kids that just because you did it this way yesterday and you're doing it this way today, it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with either of those ways.
absolutely. And in terms of the intellectual wellness piece, we're as people, we're not going to be perfect at every single thing that we come across. And so if we
Yes.
are really intellectually wealthy in one area, but maybe not quite so much next, use your skills to help you learn in other areas and use those gifts that you have to help others too.
Well, and I think as kids, when we were kids, probably said so many times, I really want to learn how to do this, or I really want to learn how to do that. And maybe that's part of being reflective is thinking about some of those things that you once thought that you would like to learn and set some goals around your learning and your curiosity, because it doesn't have to be in formal ways. But going to a museum, for example, the amount of things I learn about are it's incredible.
hmm And so right now, my 2.5-year-old is doing this really fun thing where he asks why for everything. Um, Sometimes it's annoying, but it's just taking that step back and realizing that he's still learning. And if I can tell him why not tell him?
Mhm.
He's trying to figure out how the world works around him. And the more that he gets those answers, the more that he's going to figure things out. And the less that I'm going to start answering those why questions.
And I remember as my kids got older and they were
If I don't
asking
answer them now, I'm going to be answering them in years.
exactly. Oh, sorry, we must have had a little a
Yeah.
little blip in our internet. But I remember when my kids started asking the why questions that maybe I didn't know the answer to. And I was very honest that I don't know, but let's look it up. Look it up. Let's find out together because that also spoke to something else. It also really connected us in other ways by learning together.
hmm And then encouraging it. We're at the point too with him where I can ask, well, why do you think? Like, what do you think this is about? And he can come up with sometimes they're not realistic answers, but he's still trying and he's still coming up with answers that suit his world. And then we can talk about that. And that's just a whole other way of encouraging children to piece together their world and what that looks like for them. And then showing them, even showing us adults that, hey, I can look at this from a different perspective.
And what a great way to build conversation and
Mhm.
like teaching him how to communicate by
Mm,
taking that or turning it around and asking him why what he thinks about it.
yeah,
I think
yeah.
normalizing too, we've been talking lots about triple P and, all these different little programs for families. That's what we're saying. That's what intellectual wellness or curiosity is. We should normalize that. You're not taking triple P because you're bad parents. You're taking
Mhm.
triple P to learn other ways. And how else can you do that without exploring it or
Oh,
being
absolutely.
curious or reaching out to somebody who has a different way of doing things?
Mhm.
When I taught or when I worked for the family support program and we had different tools, we would take different facilitator training so we could teach the families different strategies. If I didn't actually take that home and apply it to my own life, like who then why would I be teaching it? And I used to try out all the different strategies and to figure out what worked for me as a parent. And I think my kids were better off for it. They didn't realize that I was trying out a strategy because it was just, I was incorporating it into our lives and, working with my own children.
We're
Mhm.
getting that lifelong piece too, right?
Yeah.
I think we've, over and over again kind of applied that philosophy that when we bring something, say, to our caregiver support group, sometimes we learn something.
Yeah.
This whole year, I think, oh yeah, I know lots about physical wellness. We'll invite somebody on or we invite Anna on, and I think, oh, I didn't even think of it that way. What a great way to now I've learned something new, and it's been so exciting to me just by making those connections, being open to all these different strategies or ways of looking at it, whether they're unique to mine or not, but just being open-minded.
Mhm. And who we're learning from is Like, so I have a family who she made up a game for her kiddo. And it is one of the most amazing games that I've ever seen. Her kiddo has very high sensory needs and needs like a ton of heavy work. I use this game with almost all of my families now because it is just the most genius idea I have ever seen, not something that I ever would have come up with in a million years. And we're learning from the people that we work with and support all the time. And I'm not more than them. We're equals and we're bouncing off each other and coming up with these ideas. And being open to who you're learning from is very important too.
And I
Can
think
you
when
imagine
we
the
come to
pressure? Oh,
oh,
sorry, Shannon, go ahead.
I was just saying that's, kind of calling upon that humility of saying we don't have
Yes.
all the answers. And Paula, you had said it earlier, even with your kids, it's okay to say, you know what, actually, I don't know anything about that, but let's go have a look. That's using that humility and being humble to just say, there's no way that I could possibly know all the answers, but
Mhm.
let's go look. What a great way to model that for your family, to say it's okay to say, I don't know, but let's go look. Let's don't stop there. Let's go look.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was going to say. Why, like, we put such pressure on ourselves. We do not have to be perfect. We're all learning and growing, and I think
Yeah.
that's just life.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And we show some examples again. Once again, these are just snapshot pictures of people having the best times at it. And I think that's the other piece to remember. Just because you expose your children, and I'm sure Anna, you can agree, you can talk about, and I know your son is very receptive to these kind of conversations. Doesn't mean it goes well every time. Doesn't mean he responds perfectly back. So when you're expanding the knowledge with your kids or reading with your kids, sometimes it's just not going to go well, but that's not something to say we should never do it again. Just means
Mhm.
maybe we got to do it a little bit different, look at it a little bit differently, but don't just give up on it. It's just keeping that momentum going, and just maybe it's different books. I talk about that with my son. Not if I put a big, thick book in front of him, it was like absolutely not. But if you put anything about stats or anything about sports in front of him, he had more knowledge, read more things about that. Is that not reading? Is that not being
Yeah.
curious? Is
Because
that
he
not
loves
everything?
to learn. Like, he
Oh,
craves
does it?
learning, right?
Yes. And when we talked, about all the different ways, like the podcast, all of those kind of things of ways you can learn. So don't feel like it means you must crack a big book open. No, maybe you're that person that likes to hear it in more audible way. That's okay. Open your mind to that as well.
A very common thing that toddlers do is story tell as they're playing. And if you can interact with them and add pieces in that story, if they're willing, what a wonderful way to learn without shoving a book in their face if they don't feel like it. There's lots of times where my 3-year-old does not, he will not sit with me. He is very, very, very busy when he wants to be or when he needs to be. And so we just meet him where he's at and we go with what he needs to do. And you can do that with any age. If your 6-year-old is storytelling, add in some of the story pieces and see if you can help those aspects of learning.
Just being curious. I think that's like, I think the word of my month or something is curious.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we kind of find this funny, that, people question us, why are you going to talk about occupational wellness when you're talking about a family? But yet, if you do anything, listen, I think our farm wellness, our agricultural wellness really brought the point home about how many families are actually completely immersed in the occupation of, whether it be the parents or the family in general, because everybody on a farm tends to play a role in that occupation. That doesn't necessarily work for everybody. Some people do go off and work, but you still have a role to play in that occupation, even when you're a child. And then modeling that of what role you are in that. Maybe you're not the person that's driving up. We have lots of families that drive up, to Fort McMurray and do their work up there, or do it remotely, but you're still playing a piece and a role in that. And our agriculture families really have taught that they're constantly involved in, whether it's feeding animals, learning about what other aspects of the farming, and then fully participating in that too.
Exactly. And then developing that personal satisfaction in your life as well is part of what occupational wellness is for us.
Mm-hmm. And I think we've talked lots about, that importance of, maybe we make jokes about, the taking your child to work day, but I was just giving that example earlier today and saying I was the epitome of that, probably because I was young and I had to go to work with my mom at times as well. But then I was immersed in that work. So there's no um, like question as to why I landed in a human service. That's what my mom did for the majority of her career, was human service, supporting people with additional needs, all of that. So it was almost became a natural. And it's because I was exposed to it. Same as my nieces used to go with my mom to the auxiliary almost on a weekly basis. So there's no question as to why they are so good and compassionate with people that do require, additional help, and the kiddos that they bring in, that they include different, like all kiddos equally to come dance at their studio. It's because they were modeled that their entire lives.
Well, and it's when you think about being a child and you think about your parent going to work, it's such a strange thing because if you don't know what they're doing at work and what their job is, you could just start creating things in your own mind. And I know for myself, my mom was a nurse in the first part of her career, and I loved going to her work and seeing what she did and meeting some of the patients. And she worked in geriatric ward, and just it was interesting to be able to connect that part of her life with the person that was my mom. And then on the other side of things, one of the greatest gifts for me was when my daughter worked in our human service agency, and she was a summer student, and getting to see her in her work environment, and she really got to understand the kind of work that we did and we do. That was wonderful. And I think for her as well to really see that and understand what we do.
Oh, for sure. And I think it allows us to take the time to evaluate. We do need to find some connection to the work we do, and even for our family. So if we can model that as well, and I'm not saying all jobs have to be this perfect, passionate place that we've got to be there because we're championing something. No, sometimes we work because that's what we need to do. And then we do other things outside of that that are more of our passion. That's okay as well. But it's just teaching a balance for our kids too. You're right. How would they know what we're doing if we never talk about it?
Mhm. And just this can go back to when we were talking about problem solving earlier on. And sometimes work can be stressful and there can be issues, but just learning how to problem solve in a healthy way when it comes to occupation, then when kids are growing up and they have to get their own jobs, it's not as scary either, because it's not just a source of frustration, just a source of stress. It can be a source of companionship, socialization. Of course, there's the financial wellness, and it brings a sense of a well-rounded sense to who we are when we have a strong occupational wellness.
And I always think it's okay to challenge ourselves. Maybe we're not in our dream job, but we can certainly bring the best of ourselves to that job, because then we are going to be a little bit more content. If we're trying to be something else at that job, that's when, kind of that friction, or
Yeah.
where it gets tough to be there. But if we can bring the best version of ourselves to there in the moment, that's okay as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there we go. So talking about chores with kids really instills a bit of a sense of responsibility for them. And that's sometimes doing chores, maybe getting an allowance or whatever it is, helping the family out. That's often the first kind of job that kids have. And it's an important one.
I'm certain, as I know, as I've taught Triple P myself, that is a big piece of what we talk about. That let's have a family plan. Let's give everybody a job. It doesn't matter if one child is 2 years old and the other one is 12 years old. you're going to make it developmentally appropriate of what they can contribute, but everybody can contribute in some way. And Anna, you brought up a great example when we were talking about physical wellness about, well, maybe it's bringing the baskets of clothes up and down the stairs, or maybe you have to drag it because you're a little bit young, but that's okay too. You're still contributing somehow. And sometimes you can hit all those other things that, hey, they need a little bit of heavy work because they're getting pretty wound up here, but they're still contributing in their way.
Mhm.
I think you can make it enjoyable for the kids. We seem to do this thing in society where chores are just something that we have to do and we have to get through, and it sucks to be you. If you can point out pieces that your kids like to do, if they like bringing the laundry baskets upstairs, they're helping. It's enjoyable for them. It's good for them. If your kid loves folding laundry, let them match socks. Like there's aspects around it where they can still help and they can still contribute while still meeting their needs in the process.
Yeah,
I think that's a
absolutely.
great way to look at the strengths. Once again, when we go back in our conversation, we talk about identifying strengths in people. My nephew, he was, a bit of me and him, I'm thinking. He really likes to organize things. So he used to go through my sister's cupboards all the time, organize all her plates and her cups and all of the things in the pantry, because that's just a strength that he had. If we got in the way of it, we would have made that seem as something negative. Instead, that's just something he could take on with him. That was a positive. That was a great job. He was a great contribution to the family. So
Yeah.
And then
think
letting
out of the
go of
box.
perfectionism. Sorry, Paula?
No, go
Oh,
ahead.
I was going to say, letting go of perfectionism too. Not everything in your home when you're doing something has to be perfect. I will fold my son's laundry and then he will attempt to put it away. Is it pretty? Absolutely not. Am I going to look in the drawers and refold them? No. They're still in the drawers and they're still in the right spots. And he's still helping, and he feels like you can see that he's proud for being able to do that. So there's no reason for us to go back and fix things just because they aren't the way that I want them.
No, because you'd be taking something away from him if you did that. I think that's, and you know what? Really, do we have the time to go back and refold them? I can think of better things to do. And what a great way for him to learn that. And you know what? Who cares if he grows up to be an adult that doesn't fold his clothes nicely? Who cares?
Yeah, that's
So
his clothes to
Mhm.
wear.
yeah, exactly. So
Yeah,
he's definitely contributing to the family, which is the
yeah.
most important.
And, when we talk about this community connection, I think that's the essence of us having all of these different people, such as Anna, on our webcast and podcast, is to just highlight all the wonderful things happening within our community, but also really encouraging people to seek them out. It's okay. We've just kind of went through all of those domains to say
Mhm.
we can always learn something new. Paula and I, we've talked so often about every time we do this, we learn something new about it. But if we weren't open to the learning, then we're truly missing out. And that's the piece of when we look for supports outside of ourselves, it's understanding we don't need to be the know everything, be everything, because it's not possible. But some people on the outside might be able to contribute to your family or your kids in a different way that you can't. That's okay. It's holding that sense of grace for ourselves that we are not perfect. We can contribute what we contribute. We can try our very best, but we need help with that, and we all need it.
Yeah, and that is the exact words. All of us need support. None of us should have to live in isolation and do it on our own. It's okay to accept the support. There's so many resources here on this slide. We have many resources in our community, and Shannon has been working very hard to continue to add resources and supports to our mental health and well-being resource hub, which is where you'll find Anna's picture. She's on there as well. And it's a great way, as Shannon has said, to be able to connect a face to a name and to the support and just kind of make it less daunting.
Absolutely. And, we like to say as well, as much as we're adding all of these different resources as we find out what people do, I guess two things I want to make a point about. One, just connect with somebody. They might not have the exact answer you need, but they may be able to set you in a path to find the answers that you need. So whether that's Anna or someone else, they may not, like I said, be able to answer it, but I'm betting they can definitely send you in a direction where you'll get more answers. And other than that, if you are just looking on there, we're not taking your information. It's completely anonymous. So you can look at those resources. It's a direct link. If you just click on the button, it's going to send you to their website or Facebook page, or give you the information that you can connect with that person. And then finally, if you have additional resources that you thought, hey, this has worked wonderful for my family or for myself, please get in contact with us, because we'd love to include them with our resource.
So connect with us through sagewellnessconnection.com or on one of our social media sites, Instagram or Facebook, which is also Sage Wellness Connection. So we really hope to hear from you. And thank you so much for being here, Anna. This has been another great conversation. Really enjoyed your input and your expertise.
Thanks for having me.
Well, and I think I feel very blessed to know that I've been able to be a part of this project that has highlighted so many people, and getting to know more people has been very exciting to me. So please have a look at our other webcasts, our podcasts, if there's certain areas or information that you might need. And they're on, like Paula had said, either connect through the website, and plus we'll be emailing them out.
Take care, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.